Sure. Thank you, everyone, for joining us here today. And I'll maybe just run through a few opening comments that really lay the groundwork on, where we find ourselves today in Saskatchewan, where we find ourselves today in Canada and across North America. We are facing really what are three implied tariffs from the President of the United States as Canadians. The first is related to fentanyl and border security. Now, that's the tariff that is in place today and came into place this week. The second tariff, the indication is that it would be looked at and a decision made on March the 12th, which would impact steel and aluminum. And the third would be the reciprocal tariff that is more globally focused. Our goal has been all along in the lead up to this week and continues to be, first is that we have a no tariff environment, that we have a free and fair trading environment across North America. Second, if we do find ourselves in a situation where tariffs are in effect, that they are in effect for a minimum length of time or a limited length of time for certain. The impact of tariffs that are imposed by President Trump is first and foremost going to be felt by U.S. families. Inflationary pressures they are going to see when they fuel up their vehicle. They're going to see those same inflationary pressures very shortly when they make a trip to the grocery store, for example. The secondary impact will be job loss. Job loss in American communities. The proposed counter tariffs would have a similar effect in Canada on Canadian families, as an import tariff is designed to do just that. I think it's also imperative for us to look at just where the global trade relationship is, in particular with our largest trading partner, the United States, with a number of other countries, and where that'll go. I think we need to keep an eye on as we find our way through this conversation. First, in the case of Taiwan, we see essentially a trade of multi-billion-dollar investment for a no-tariff environment. In the case of Japan, we see a trade or an exchange of military procurement, a commitment of U.S. military procurement for a no-tariff environment for Japan. In Mexico, we see a somewhat different approach where they are looking at limiting some of the imported parts, namely auto parts, from other areas of the world into Mexico and thus into a USMCA free trade zone. So trying to work with the U.S. administration and the president on some of their priorities. And in China, we did see an increase of the U.S. tariff on Chinese goods from 10 to 20%. In response to that tariff was a Chinese tariff on ag products coming out of the U.S. into China. And so that may have an impact on Saskatchewan and on Canada as well. Also important for us, I believe, to look at the national response that we have been working with the federal government on for a number of weeks now. First and foremost, I would say that the government of Saskatchewan supports the targeted response that the federal government has come forward with, which starts with $30 billion in very targeted tariffs effective now. Will grow in 3 weeks by another $125 billion for a total of $155 billion in counter tariffs. That's a big number. However, those are targeted tariffs to maximize the impact on American companies, but minimize the impact on Canadian families. And so credit to the federal government for not going dollar-for-dollar tariffs, which would have a tremendous impact on Canadian families. About $600 billion are experiencing the American tariff moving south. About $155 billion of very targeted impact tariffs is the response from the federal government. Which brings me to where we are today, and through those discussions up to and including yesterday between the other 12 premiers, myself and the Prime Minister, as to what the provinces can do, in particular in the non-tariff space, in the regulatory space. And we discussed a number of non-tariff measures the federal government could take, but also a number of non-tariff measures that provincial governments could take as well. And so effective immediately, what we are here to announce today is the Saskatchewan Liquor and Gaming Authority will stop purchasing U.S.-produced alcohol. And we'll stop selling any U.S. alcohol that we currently have in stock to any of the private retailers that are in the province. We'd also announced that the goods and services that are procured by the Government of Saskatchewan ministries as well as the Crown corporations are going to make every effort to prioritize Canadian suppliers. We're going to put our capital projects that are not yet in motion. We're going to put a very temporary pause on those projects to reassess how they are moving through the Sask Builds procedure. Those projects that are being constructed as we speak, the call and the ask has went out to the contractors involved to report back with respect to what level of American content they have in that construction and how they are going to drive that number down and drive the Canadian content up. The goal here is for us to greatly lower or even get to zero with respect to the U.S. procurement in the capital projects that we have, the publicly funded capital projects that we have. But there are a number of exceptions, as we know, for essential products in each of those builds, and I think that speaks to the integration of the North American economy and the fact that we have enjoyed and I think valued from Saskatchewan's perspective the trade relationship that we have north and south of the 49th parallel. We are also encouraging school divisions, municipalities, post-secondary institutes to adopt similar procurement policies as they go through the next number of days. Important for us to remember as well, this is not the first and likely not the last tariff conversation that Saskatchewan has had. We are a province that exports $49 billion to over 160 countries around the world. We're a province that has a presence in those countries, and we're a province that engages when we have trade challenges. 5 or 6 years ago, we had a very similar challenge, albeit not as large, significant, and widespread, but a very similar challenge with the previous President Trump administration when it came to steel and aluminum tariffs. We also had discussions with respect to potential uranium tariffs at that point in time. We've had to work through tariff discussions with the countries of India when it comes to pulse exports, Canadian or Saskatchewan pulse exports, as well as China when it comes to canola exports and some of the non-tariff barriers like phytosanitary standards that were identified by China a number of years ago. And so this is not our first time as a province to engage internationally on tariff or non-tariff barriers with some of our more significant trading partners around the world. But it's also important for us to remember this. Our most significant trading partner has, and when the dust settles, will still be the United States of America. Our most significant ally has and will continue to be, when the dust settles, our most significant ally in the world. That's not to say that our relationship isn't changing before our very eyes, but we do export, as the province of Saskatchewan, over 55%, about $29 billion of our exports do go to the United States. About 80% of our imports also come from the United States. We very much, as a government, have committed not only to deepening the trade relationship with the United States of America, but diversifying our trade relationship with other countries around the world. And you saw that as we formed government in 2007 with a focus on international missions alongside the industries that are creating wealth and creating jobs in this province. And I would say you saw a doubling down of that effort in 2018 with the investment in trade and investment offices in 9 different countries around the world, so that we have a presence in those markets when we have challenges like we do here. So that is, and I would say that investment and those trade missions alongside industries and our intent, very intentional effort to build that province-to-nation trading relationship has been criticized at times on the floor of this legislature and at times even publicly in the media. Well, thankfully, we have withstood any of that criticism. We've continued to make that investment and create the contacts that we have to rely on those contacts during times of unrest. We'd always said that investment was that investment was there to protect the market share that we have in countries of interest. And I would say there's no larger country of interest than the United States of America. 2, it was so that we had people on the ground to identify when we had opportunities to expand that market share, and we've seen that happen in many markets around the world, including in the United States of America. And 3, to ensure that we have relationships like we do have built for very tumultuous and trying times like what we see here today. And so Saskatchewan is one of the most diversified provinces and least dependent on the United States of America for our exports. That being said, they are our largest trading partner, our largest ally, and it's important for each of us to remember that as we go through what is admittedly a very challenging conversation with the President and his administration, but we will find our way through it. And I have with me our Deputy Premier, the Minister of SLGA. No. Finance, Minister of Finance. Well, I knew that. And Warren Kaeding, our Minister of Trade and Export Development. Being no questions, we'll. Well, there's a lot that's still in motion yesterday, and I think you could say welcome to at least the next number of months and maybe the next number of years as things change before our very eyes. Today was the day for, in my opinion, the Prime Minister to lay out what the national plan was, of which we had highly discussed and discussed on numerous occasions on our weekly calls and even more frequent at times. On those very calls, we had also discussed, as you can see, a somewhat coordinated response among the provinces. Not entirely coordinated, but somewhat coordinated among the provinces. And so the fact that we're doing this today versus yesterday, I think, is of little significance. The fact that you see, virtually all the provinces moving forward quite closely and supporting the federal government in the targeted tariffs that they have is important for us to recognize as Canadians. This is going to be a changing environment, day by day by day, and we've seen changes even today as it looks like the American auto manufacturers have made, to some degree, a breakthrough in the President understanding the true impact of the tariffs on that industry, and it would be our hope that there's more breakthroughs in the days ahead. No, I think this is a pretty strong message. I don't know when the last time we've, looked at the entire procurement of the government of Saskatchewan, which is significant, whether it be in capital or whether it be in services or what that might be. That is a significant change, of course, I think, for us to even be looking that way. That being said, throughout those phone calls as well, as we move forward through this time, and I've said this all along, there's going to be times for us to make decisions in consultation with the federal government, for the federal government to make decisions, and us as a province to make decisions. And we shouldn't get ahead of ourselves in those with surmising what they might be. But again, and I just remind us, this is a significant trading partner. It's our largest trading partner, and it is going to be when the dust settles. That being said, what's happening today is just simply not right. It's the decisions are being based on often incorrect or flawed or information that just simply is bringing our North American economy to a place where nobody wants it to go. It's going to result not only in inflationary pressures but job loss north and south of the border. It benefits nobody who lives in this continent. It benefits people that live on another continent.
Speaking of tariffs, isn't there possibly an opportunity to diversify Saskatchewan here? Like China's putting tariffs onto American products but not ours, and then ours all of a sudden become cheaper possibly?
Yes. Yeah, I would say that there's always opportunities to diversify, and thankfully, we have contacts and a presence in many of those countries where those opportunities will arise. I would think over the next while you will possibly see additional opportunities as well to diversify as we see the relationships ebb and flow not only with the United States, North American partners, Mexico and Canada, but other trading partners around the world as well, and we've already started to see that in the last week.
What message are
Well, these measures are going to be painful for a number of American families, but I would say that it is the $600 billion of goods that are being subject to a tax from their president that is ultimately going to push up the cost of everything they do, and it's going to threaten many of the jobs in certain industries throughout the U.S.
Is this plan just coming up today, like you just came up with this plan today in your cabinet meeting?
No.
I guess why did it then take so long
Oh, a whole 24 hours ago. I mean, like this is the conversation that we're going to be having for, the next number of months. And I think it's important for us to recognize that. 24 hours is not going to change, well, it may change some of the decisions that are coming out of the White House. But we need to understand that this is not, this is going to be the new normal for the foreseeable future, is to have this changing environment coming from south of the border, coming out of the White House, and we're going to have to manage ourselves through this. Manage the economies or the industries that are creating wealth, and defending those industries at times that are creating wealth as well. As I said today, we saw a breakthrough in the auto industry where the American auto manufacturers seem to have been able to get through to the president, and that's who is making these decisions. There are a number of folks around him that do ultimately get through to him, and that's what we have been trying to engage with from the provincial perspective, alongside other premiers and alongside industry partners here as well. But it is encouraging when you see one of those groups actually get through to the president and he makes a decision on the facts as they actually are, that the 25% tariffs are going to be hugely and demonstrably impact the auto manufacturing industry to the point of shutdowns. And I think the same can be I think the same can be said for a number of other industries as well, many of which Saskatchewan supplies either the raw materials or some degree of value-added materials for.
I think it's suggested Saskatchewan no longer sell potash uranium oil to the U.S. and find different markets. I guess you're kind of on the same page, but you're not quite prepared to cut them off completely.
Yeah, well, it'd be very difficult, I think, to cut off the flow of a product completely. What Premier Ford has put forward with respect to electricity that is being produced by the provincially owned hydro company is to not even cut that off, but to actually add a surcharge to it. And so, adding a surcharge to a product that the government doesn't own would be a tariff, of which would be the federal government's purview or responsibility. Again, I would point to the fact that if you were to shut down production going to the U.S., and let's use potash as an example, that would result in immediate job loss in Saskatchewan. Immediate job loss in Saskatchewan. That's not our goal. Our goal is to open up markets not only in the U.S. and around the world. So, as we move forward, there's a lot of emotion in this discussion on when decisions are made, what decisions are made. There's a lot of hypothetical statements that are thrown out there. We need to understand that there is going to be a changing environment. Some of that is going to be emotional, but as we move forward, us as representatives of the government of Saskatchewan, we need to make very calm, sensible decisions that are in the best interest of the people that live here.
With the idea that there might be another round of tariffs coming March 12th and then April 2nd, I suppose, what other options are on the table for Saskatchewan right now to respond to that sort of in an anticipatory fashion?
That would be surmising or talking about the, hypothetically what might be happening in the future. And so those decisions will be made. But I can assure you, and to Lisa's question earlier, those discussions about, what opportunities we might have as a province, what opportunities we might have working alongside the federal government, those discussions are occurring as we speak, as were these discussions about moving forward in the space of procurement, as well as U.S. liquor and beer in our wholesale system here in Saskatchewan. You've seen largely that coordinated across the province over the course of the last 24 hours. And I think that's come about through the multiple discussions that we've had with the other premiers and the Prime Minister.
So there being some relief for 3 auto manufacturers, you yourself have had 2 missions to the United States from Trump came back in power. I'm wondering if those missions have yielded any results or if there's any possibility of utilizing any of the benefit of those trade missions.
Yes, and I would say not just the most recent missions to Washington, but some of the relationships that have been formed even prior to that. There's some representatives that have moved into secretary positions and whatnot that we've met numerous times over the last number of years. You saw Senator Grassley make some some strong comments, and others are starting to make those comments as well when it comes to the impact of putting a 25% tariff on a product like potash, which largely, about 90%, 85 to 90% of U.S. potash comes from this province of Saskatchewan, as does about 35% of the global supply. So, yes, I would say that they are, and I think most recently you can look at the fact that energy is at 10% as opposed to 25% would be a very tangible impact of those relationships over time, and I can assure you that is and was part of that discussion and will continue to be part of that discussion, the importance of $15 billion of Saskatchewan oil, never mind the oil that comes from Alberta, going down into the Midwest, into places like Illinois, Ohio, Louisiana, and Texas, and providing the opportunity for people to work in those refineries and providing energy security to the United States of America. So, but they need to keep going. We've done them for over a decade and a half now. And it's a relationship that isn't built overnight. It's a relationships that are built over time, and we need to rely on them today, and we need to utilize them. And it's our hope, as we said, our goal from day one has been that there's no tariffs, and if the tariffs were introduced, that they'd be on for a minimal amount of time.
Just trying to understand what you said. Saskatchewan does not have jurisdiction on potash. That's the federal government's jurisdiction?
Yeah, as it goes as an export tax. Yeah.
Okay.
And they shouldn't do it. I don't know if they're considering doing it on automobiles, given the most recent decision. I would hope not. We wouldn't support that either.
And what was your conversation?
Restricting or putting a tax on?
Well, he suggested you consider no longer
Shipping it.
Right. So what was that conversation?
Well, that conversation would be pretty short. I'm not going to put Saskatchewan people out of work at potash mines.
In light of the conversation.
Well, I just said we do support the very targeted $155 billion of retaliatory tariffs that the federal government is moving forward on. Begrudgingly, I would say as well, because all tariffs are going to have an impact on you and I and every other family that lives in North America. The tariffs that President Trump is putting on will largely have an impact on American families. The retaliatory tariffs, yes, will have an impact on American businesses, but will largely have an impact on Canadian families as well. And Jim, maybe when I'm finished, you can speak to what the economic impacts are to our province of Saskatchewan. So we are supportive of that very targeted package of retaliatory tariffs. Not supportive of export tariffs, certainly not at this time. The export tariffs are really a tax or export stoppages, if you could even do such a thing, will put Canadians out of work.
Why did you got the table at this particular point, and why is a more tempered approach that underscores that helpful at this point? When you're dealing with government in the U.S., it's obviously not particularly rational, not particularly reasonable and everything else. I don't understand the tone here versus what I've heard from another 3 years. I'm still trying to better grasp why you're choosing this route, because human analysis.
Do you think it'll be fixed by anger? Well, introducing the measures that we are today, and understanding that now all 10 provinces, and I suspect the territories as well, it's not a tempered response. It's a pretty significant response.
Have you heard anything about any other cargoes, like for potash or uranium?
You hear about them when I do. Yeah. Jim, do you want to just make a comment on the provincial impact to our economy?
Sure. So, of course, our finance officials have been working diligently trying to understand if the tariffs are on. And of course, this all is contingent on how long they're actually on. But if they annualize it, the last estimate that they provided to me is an effect to the GDP would be $4.9 billion, which is about 5.8%, so very significant on the GDP side. And overall would reduce revenue to the province by up to $1.4 billion. Now, hopefully that would be a worst case scenario. That would be the tariffs as they were announced, 25 and 10, and annualized. So obviously we're hoping it would be significantly better than that. As the Premier said, things are changing literally by the hour. So we're hopeful cooler heads will prevail.
On that note, what is the off-ramp here? I mean, is it early renegotiation of USMCA
Likely. You know, as the Prime Minister said yesterday, it's a little bit difficult to actually put your finger on what is being asked for by the President. You know, there's a number of things that get floated out on a daily basis, and there's things that change from day to day. And as I said, this is the new normal for the foreseeable futures. You know, things are going to change and change very quickly. The off-ramp, as I see it, is not a renegotiation of USMCA, but the planned review of USMCA. Things have changed even since the signing of that deal. For example, you know, various, you know, auto parts or maybe even agricultural equipment parts that are being used in those implements and those vehicles today weren't being used even 5 or 6 years ago when USMCA came into force. And so there is a planned review of that program, and I would say that the tariffs that we have today, which are the fentanyl border security tariffs, the tariffs that are being talked about on the 12th of March, which are the aluminum steel tariffs, and then the third set would be the reciprocal tariffs. I would be our hope that sooner rather than later, and we've urged the federal government to open the door to entering that USMCA review earlier, sooner rather than later, because we think once that agreement can be made, that we would be able to find our way, you know, through this daily barrage of what's going to experience a tariff next.
About government procurement, are you talking about across all sectors and crowns as well?
Yeah, yes, we are. And they're currently, as I said, on all new significant capital expenditures are just currently on pause for a very brief temporary period of time, and we don't know if these tariffs will be on another 3 or 4 days or 3 or 4 months, to look at, you know, where they are in the procurement process and where they're headed. And then second to that, the projects that are already in motion, we've asked the proponents and the contractors to report back to the government of Saskatchewan as to what content that you might have in your subcontractors. The total of the cost would be American. It would be come from the U.S. of U.S. origins, and how are you going to drive it down?
How are you gonna define that though? Like, let's say you're hiring McKinsey, which has offices in Canada, but technically was started in America. How do you define what is American, what is?
Yeah, there's some challenge in that, and then I would say there's also some challenge in so first of all in what is American, and the second challenge would be in can you get the product somewhere else, and is it only available there? And why this is so challenging is due to the integration of our economies. You have businesses, and we have them in Saskatchewan, Saskatchewan-based businesses that have offices throughout the U.S. as well, and probably the largest of them being a couple of our potash companies. But we have grain companies as well as, you know, some of our short-line manufacturing companies that have offices throughout the U.S., which I think speaks to the integration of our economy, regardless of the industry, speaks to the detriment of any talk of tariffs, and how hurtful and painful they can be from an economic perspective to families on both sides of the border. So it's you know, I think there you have struck on what is the overarching challenge is we do have an integrated economy. As you know, steel is crossing the border 5-6 times before it's going in the ground as a piece of pipe. I often tell the story of an ag crop year cycle and just how integrated we are with the products that flow back and forth across the 49th parallel. And so therein lies the challenge, and I think therein lies the most important thing that we all need to remember throughout this is entirely problematic when we are working through a 25 and 10% tariff. It's problematic for people, for individuals. The President has said this is going to create jobs and increase the wealth and better cost of living for Americans. Well, it's been tried before, and it simply didn't work. And it isn't going to work this time. It's actually going to benefit people in other countries around the world. It's not going to benefit anyone in North America because of the deep integration of our economies by their very design, not just by their geography, but by their design. And so we need to all remember as we get into this, as frustrating as it is, and as challenging as it is, and as hurtful and impactful as it is in the way of job loss and inflationary pressures, we need to find a way through it. And it's incumbent on our federal government and our federal leadership to look for every opportunity, like Japan has been able to procure, like Taiwan has been able to procure, Mexico is attempting, to walk through the door when you have the opportunity to get us to an environment where we're back to trading in a free and fair trading environment, as opposed to experiencing these tariffs that are just entirely detrimental to the Saskatchewan economy, the Canadian economy, and I would say our North American, not only energy and food security system that we have built, but our general security as well.
You said that you're supporting counter-tariffs.
Well, I think if you asked every leader, they would actually, in their truest form, answer that the same way, because they're harmful to Canadian families. Tariffs that are put in by President Trump are harmful to American families. They are increasing the cost of fuel, increasing the cost of groceries, and virtually $600 billion worth of goods that flow south into the U.S. Are going to be a higher cost tomorrow than they are last week, because of those tariffs being in place. The same can be said for counter tariffs, which are tariffs on products that are coming into Canada that you and I are purchasing. So yeah, I understand the necessity of that very targeted tariff package, and I said we not only support it, but we appreciate the fact that the federal government has been as careful as they can be in not impacting Canadian families in any large degree. It will have an impact, but not impacting Canadian families near as much as if we went the full $600 billion dollar for dollar tariff response. However, in the products that they have selected, it should have what they consider the maximum impact on American businesses. And I've said from the beginning that targeted tariff package to have an impact on American businesses was always the goal of Saskatchewan. That's what we did 5 years ago, and that's what we did 10 or 12 years ago under country of origin labeling. And so credit to the federal government for coming up with that package. It's much larger this time than it has had to be in times previous. But no, we don't want tariffs on or counter tariffs for that matter.
Now, again, not to repeat the same question over and over again, but you say that from other premiers, we're hearing a lot more rah-rah, Team Canada, let's fight back, as opposed to we're doing this because. I guess, why is there a difference there? Why are you on this side and not that side?
We're all on the same side, and there is only one side, the side of North America, and Canada very much is a part of that. The North American trade agreement, whether it's NAFTA or whether it's USMCA, have built a very integrated economy, not only from across the 49th parallel between Canada and the U.S., but between Mexico and the U.S. and Canada as well. It's a very integrated economy, and that's what makes these tariffs so very painful to industries that are creating jobs and wealth in our province, across our nation. But also, I think you're going to see that very same pain and job loss being experienced south of the 49th parallel as well. And so the whole fact that we're even having this conversation is beyond what a person could comprehend.
Any consideration of support for industries like steel, for example, if they come on the shelf? Any support for those industries?
Working very closely with each of the industries on everything we can do to keep people employed, first and foremost in those industries. Worked with the federal government on what some of those supports might look like if they're necessary moving forward. But again, if we all see what's happening with the markets. We all see the decisions that are being made by the Trump administration, as folks like the American Automotive Automotive Manufacturing Association gets through to him and his administration on the facts. And so it would be our hope that these tariffs aren't on for a long period of time.
If worse came to worse and this carried on for a long time, we could always, hold back grain and potash, but we can't do that with our live animals. Has any thought been given yet to what will happen to our live cattle and hogs that come from
Yeah, that is, and Warren, you might speak a little bit to this as well. But live animals, hogs, cattle are a little bit more challenging situation, as they're just that, they're live, and oftentimes contracted for a specific date at a specific place. And again, I would just start off, it speaks to just how highly integrated our North American economy is, and it is beyond, I think, what any of us even realized. You'll have, hogs, hog genetics that'll start up in my area in Spiritwood at Fast Genetics. Those will, then be passed on to a sow barn somewhere, feeder barn south of the border, maybe back to a packing plant north, or it just is, you know, highly integrated with a very live product. But you might have some more you have met with virtually all of the industries that will be impacted across Saskatchewan in the last number of weeks and months.
No, thank you, Premier, and absolutely right. The integration that we've got in all sectors, really, in everything that we produce in this province, and live cattle is certainly one of them. I had a engagement session with Minnesota Chamber of Commerce, number of grower associations there, and they talked about the movement of live cattle from the time it's born to the time it's slaughtered up to 4 times across the border. So that's how integrated that we are in the livestock sector. Now, we have also huge packing plants here in Canada, but also depend on live cattle that come from Nebraska, from Iowa, from, you know, across the American Midwest. And so ultimately, those industries also depend on live cattle coming back across the border. And even the feed sector, we're seeing corn moving back across the border to feed cattle in both locations. So I think it's a very integrated market. It's a very complicated market, and I think, again, as we continue to engage with grower groups and associations on both sides of the border, explaining how tariffs are ultimately going to hurt the consumer and hurt the producer, that message is eventually going to resonate. And that's why I think it's so imperative that we have Premier going back and forth across the border to Washington and taking trade individuals with them to have that same conversation with their colleagues and counterparts across the border. Last 2 days, I've had a number of engagements with our unions and actually encourage them to do the same thing with their fellow union members across the border. Ultimately explain to each other how this is going to be affecting their employers as well as their employee base. And so those are the conversations I think that we need to continue to have as we go through this process. And eventually the message comes through. We've started to hear from a couple of U.S. governors now, just in the last day or so, start to talk about vocally how this is affecting their base, their consumers, their producers in their state. So I think the message is starting to get through. We just need to continue to go hard on the messaging.
But do we know what we're gonna do if we have a bunch of animals that there's no slaughter capacity for in Canada?
Well, and that's certainly something that producers themselves are grappling with right now, certainly as we're coming through the new calving season, and ultimately how are they going to market them. So again, not knowing where tariffs are going to be and how they're going to unfold, I think the most important thing is that even our producers are having engagement with their processors, with their feedlot owners, and getting a good handle as to what is our next step with this? What are we going to do with this?
And I would say the end result is, in this case, largely a lot of that product will flow to a U.S. Consumer, U.S. packing plant, and U.S. consumer. And the short answer to that question, and it's an unfortunate answer, is the American family is going to pay more.
It's very difficult. Everybody's grappling with that across the country right now. As you saw today with the auto sector, things are changing by the minute. So it's a work in progress is all I can tell you.
You did the one. So yeah, I think Minister Reiter had mentioned, you know, if it was annualized over the course of the year, what that cost would be. We've seen a couple of other budgets come out with some various contingency plans in it, all done with deficit financing. And so I think if you could be able to let us know whether the tariffs will be on another 3 days, 30 days, or 3 years, that would really help in, you know, developing everyone's budget, not just Saskatchewan's budget. And therein lies the challenges. You know, what length of time, at what rate will the other 2 tariffs actually stack onto this? And this is the utter chaos that we are dealing with. And I had a conversation last night actually with a municipal leader about the challenges that they're having in developing their budget as well. Just existentially, you know, some of their capital projects are awfully expensive relative to what they were 5 years ago, and there's a real concern as they look at some additional capital projects this summer and into the next year or two, that's going to get a significant amount worse as opposed to better. And so there's concern, I think, at all levels of government. As far as where we land on March the 19th, I think it's important to note that Saskatchewan will be in a strong financial situation, and in a position to support Saskatchewan people should they need it through a prolonged tariff. You'll find that out on the 19th. And as I said, contingency funds that were put in place in the budgets I've seen thus far were done through deficit financing. So if you have one or don't have one, and you make one throughout the year, if it's needed, there's really no difference. Absolutely, absolutely. In fact, if you, with respect to, the changes that we're making when it comes to some of the alcohol sales, you very shortly will not have a lot of choice. But absolutely, I've always said that people should not only look at buying Canadian, but look at buying locally to their community. Second to that, look to buying locally in their region, in their province. And third to that, buy Canadian, and then buy North American.
Just so I'm clear, when you talk about the provincial impacts and dollar amounts, that's if the tariffs were on the year, is that what you're
It'd be an annualized rate.
You hinted that you're gonna have for 3 years, but something you're gonna have to deal with until Trump ends his second year?
No, I just pulled that out of the air. I was going in threes, 3 days, 30 days, and or 3 months and 3 years. My hope would be for 3 days or less. As I said, our goal has been very, very clear, and it really is. It's really senseless when you look at the degree of integration of the North American economy and how we are achieving that food, energy, and manufacturing security together. And I understand there's opportunities where the president would maybe like Canadians and the Canadian government to look in the mirror when it comes to military procurement, for example, achieving our 2% spend. And I won't speak for all the premiers, but what I hear is a lot of support for that around the First Minister's table, even to the point of potentially, if we don't have the ability to procure it all with Canadian sources, is take a look at what Japan did. By essentially trading some U.S. military procurement for a non-tariff environment. So there will be opportunities as we work through what is a very chaotic conversation with the president and his administration. There'll be opportunities for our federal government to find a way to a deal, as to quote the president. And we should be looking for those. Not saying that we take every one, because we don't want a bad deal for Canada. For sure, we want a deal where at the end of the day, it is good for Americans, but it's essentially good for Canadians as well, and good for us in the province of Saskatchewan. Where we are right now can't last. The markets are stating just that, but it can't last because we are going to experience job loss across North America, not specific south and north of the border.
Thanks, everybody.